Allen Company, 47 years young and a proud sponsor, wishes OOIDA all the best as you celebrate 50 years.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
OOIDA is once again urging the FMCSA to take action on broker transparency. I'll discuss that and more with OOIDA Director of Federal Affairs, Jay Grimes. A transport company recently stepped up to help deliver parts for a project to assemble a C-47 at Camp Toccoa in Currahee, Georgia. Landline Now's Ashley Blackford spoke with the woman who coordinated the effort. And finally, dating back to the mid-90s, several decisions were made that sought to open the U.S. southern border to Mexico-based motor carriers. The effort ultimately failed, and OOIDA can be thanked for that. In celebration of the association's 50th anniversary, we commemorate that accomplishment with Chief Operating Officer Rod Knopfziger. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Our top story today, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association is keeping up its pressure on FMCSA to do something about the lack of broker transparency. In a letter to the agency, OOIDA called for a notice of proposed rulemaking and other moves that promote broker transparency as soon as possible, adding that updating the regulations won't just protect carriers from unlawful brokers, but also improve highway safety and driver retention. And while there are rules that are supposed to stop broker fraud in effect right now, Jay Grimes, OOIDA Director of Federal Affairs, points out they're not getting the job done.
Unfortunately, these rules are never enforced. We see a lot of broker entities coming up with loopholes to get around the regulations and really prevents motor carriers from accessing any of the information that by law they should have rights to. And that's kind of the basis for our petition back in 2020 and kind of the basis for now that the agency has decided to move forward with a rulemaking, what we're hoping can be addressed.
FMCSA is working on it. In March, the agency announced it would issue a notice of proposed rulemaking to address the issue, and a regulatory agenda schedule suggested such a notice would be published in June, but the industry is still waiting. In its letter, OOIDA wrote that action is needed more than ever, with broker abuse and fraud cases running rampant. That's something Grimes keeps coming back to.
Broker issues continue to be among the top problems that drivers and small business motor carriers are experiencing, especially, as we see kind of rates come down again throughout 2023 and, hearing about double brokering, broker fraud, not being able to get the rate information from brokers when they request it. It's really kind of piling on the motor carriers when it comes to dealing with brokers.
We'll have more on this issue a little later on in the program when Jay Grimes returns. A truck driver is being honored for stopping a human trafficking operation. The Truckload Carriers Association named Michael its latest highway angel this week. Michael's full name and hometown were left out to protect his identity. TCA says it all happened in June in a border state off Interstate 10 with Michael at a rest stop just after midnight. That's when a pickup truck with a tarp and cage pulled up in front of him, and a woman got out of the truck and went around to the back of it. Michael said the woman raised the tarp, took the padlock off the cage, and out came 3 or 4 little girls, no older than 3 or 4 years old, to use the bathroom. When they finished, Michael says he saw 2 adults force the girls back into that cage, lock it up, and cover it again with a tarp. Michael called the cops, but before they could arrive, the pickup truck sped off. Michael followed them and says the truck got about 2 or 3 miles ahead of him when, as he put it, cops came out of everywhere and pulled the pickup over. Several children were found inside the cage, and police later told Michael that several of them had been reported missing. Police also told him for his own protection he should get out of there in case anyone affiliated with the human traffickers was watching. Clearly worthy of being named a highway angel, Michael joins hundreds of other professional truck drivers who have been honored since 1997 for kindness, courtesy, and courage displayed while on the job. Hino Motor Sales USA is recalling thousands of trucks due to a fuel tank issue. The recall spans various model year 2020 through 2024 Hino trucks with 70 or 90-gallon fuel tanks The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says a fuel sender float may deform and detach, which can lead to an inaccurate fuel gauge reading. More than 8,000 Hino trucks fall under the recall. Owner notification letters are expected to go out in October. Dealers will fix the problem free of charge. More than 2/3 of all bridges in the U.S. are in a state of disrepair. That's according to new analysis from the American Road and Transportation Builders Association. Add them all up, and the total comes to more than 222,000 deficient bridges, stretching more than 6,000 miles across the U.S. The association used data from the U.S. Department of Transportation to come up with a report, estimating it would cost nearly $320 million to make all the needed repairs and would take 75 years at the current pace. Help is out there, though. Some $10.6 billion is available to states for bridge work, money that comes from the infrastructure law, with another $16 billion becoming available over the next few years. The states with the highest percentage of bridges in disrepair: West Virginia, where 20% of all the state's bridges are deficient. Iowa isn't far behind at 19%, followed by South Dakota at 17%. We've been following the latest out of California, which recently gave San Francisco the green light to let autonomous robo-taxis run 24/7. So we may be getting more stories like this one. SF Gate reports that a self-driving car from the company Cruise found itself stuck in a patch of wet concrete while traveling through the city's Western Addition neighborhood on Tuesday. A witness said there was no passenger or driver in the car at the time, and that a group of Cruise workers later came by to get the car out. A Cruise spokesperson later confirmed to Gizmodo via email that the company did in fact have to go back and retrieve the car. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but one has to worry that it's just a matter of time. And even when humans are behind the wheel of a self-driving vehicle, things can go horribly wrong. Such was the case all the way back in 2018 when a self-driving Uber vehicle with a human behind the wheel struck and killed a pedestrian in Tempe, Arizona. That queued up a years-long criminal case that ended this week when the operator of that vehicle, Rafaela Vasquez, pleaded guilty to endangerment. It's part of a plea deal that keeps Vasquez out of prison, but puts her on 3 years of supervised probation instead. Prosecutors had argued she was watching a television show just moments before hitting the victim. Her attorney said she was only listening to the show but checking company Slack messages on another device. Kodiak Robotics and Pilot have opened up a truck port that will serve as a home base for Kodiak's autonomous trucks in the Atlanta area. The Pilot-owned facility in Villa Rica, Georgia, will be a transfer hub for manual first and last mile deliveries and will be used to conduct maintenance, refueling, and enhanced inspections specifically for self-driving trucks. Kodiak says the new truck port will serve as an eastern satellite hub for its network, while the company's Dallas-Fort Worth hub will continue to serve as the main terminal for its autonomous truck fleet. Some sad news to report as former OOIDA board member Ray Kosicki has passed away. Ray was a veteran of the U.S. Army serving during the Vietnam War. Following his honorable discharge, he started his own trucking company and was the owner and operator of Kosicki Trucking for more than 40 years until his retirement. Ray's family says he enjoyed trap shooting, radio-controlled boats, and eating Jelly Bellies and short ribs, and was a kind, caring, and lovable man who never had a bad word to say about anything or anyone. He's survived by his wife of nearly 40 years, Joan. Ray Kosicki was 76 years old. And finally, a few dozen new truck parking spots just opened up in southwestern Nevada. Love's announced a new location in Tonopah. The travel stop off US 95 has 40 truck parking spaces and 7 diesel bays. It's Love's 6th location in the state of Nevada. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. Next, I'll discuss the latest on broker transparency with OOIDA Director of Federal Affairs, Jay Grimes, and Ashley Blackford reports on a transport company that helped with a project to assemble a C-47. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
For can't miss accuracy, weigh your truck on a CAT scale.
When you weigh on a CAT scale, you get a no excuses guarantee. You can now save time weighing by using your smartphone. Find out more at weightmytruck.com.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one, That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
OOIDA is once again urging the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration to take action on broker transparency. Welcome back to Landline Now. This is Regulatory Roundup, and I'm Mark Reddy. I'm joined by OOIDA Director of Federal Affairs, Jay Grimes. Jay, thanks for joining me.
Great to be back.
Great to have you here. Let's kind of start with this. What do the regulations say now about brokers and transparency? Because that's part of the issue.
Yeah, that's a big aspect of this kind of back and forth on broker transparency with FMCSA and Regulation 371.3, which was first implemented in 1980, kind of outlines the requirements of the records to be kept by brokers, and it states a broker shall keep a record of each transaction, including the name and address of the motor carrier, bill of lading of the freight bill number, the amount of compensation received by the broker for the brokerage service performed, and the name of the payer, and the amount of any freight charges collected by the broker, and the date of the payment to the carrier. And there's some other provisions in there. And kind of one other important provision there is that each party to a brokered transaction has the right to review the record of the transaction required to be kept by the rules. So there are federal motor carrier safety regulations that are on the books right now, kind of outlining the information that brokers are supposed to keep and are supposed to provide access for if requested by the motor carriers. Unfortunately, these rules are never enforced. We see a lot of broker entities coming up with loopholes to get around the regulations and really prevents motor carriers from accessing any of the information that by law they should have rights to. And that's kind of the basis for our petition back in 2020 and kind of the basis for now that the agency has decided to move forward with a rulemaking, what we're hoping can be addressed.
You mentioned that May 2020 petition. Can you kind of give us an overview of what specifically the association asked for at that time? Right.
And then this is really in the wake of the pandemic when we saw rates really hit pretty much rock bottom. And we heard a lot from members, a lot from drivers about the need to improve broker transparency. And we requested that FMCSA, ensure that brokers provide transactional information automatically within 48 hours of the completion of contractual services via electronic dispatch, and that brokers be prohibited from including any provision that requires a carrier to waive their rights to access transaction records. And kind of one of these loopholes that we see all the time is that in these contracts, brokers will include a provision that the carriers waive their rights to review transactional information. Unfortunately, carriers kind of have to sign it if they want the business. But, given the regulations that are in the FMCSRs, we don't think that should be a way of doing business. And that was one of the main points of our petition back in 2020.
The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration did finally respond to that petition. What was their response?
Yeah, so there was a back and forth kind of through the rulemaking process on our 2020 petition. There was listening sessions, public comment periods. The Transportation Intermediaries Association, kind of the trade association representing many different brokers, actually petitioned the agency to eliminate 371.3C requirement. Back in March, we finally got an initial decision from the agency, I think citing with our petition saying that they were going to move forward with the rulemaking to consider amendments to 371.3. and that they actually at the same time also announced that they had denied the petition from TIA to eliminate 371.3C. So the announcement in March, we applauded, and we're anticipating the first notice of proposed rulemaking to consider amendments to improve broker transparency. Looking at the calendar here now, mid-August, we're still waiting on that notice of proposed rulemaking to be published. So we have inquired with the agency earlier today about what the status of the rulemaking is and urging them to publish the notice of proposed rulemaking as soon as possible, given the fact that a lot of these broker transparency concerns continue to plague the industry.
And in the meanwhile, there's a lot of members of OOIDA that are calling in and telling us about problems they're having. Can you give us just any examples of the types of things we're hearing from truckers as they call in?
Yeah, no question. Broker transparency, broker issues continue to be among the top problems that drivers and small business motor carriers are experiencing, especially, as we see kind of rates come down again throughout 2023 and, hearing about double brokering, broker fraud, not being able to get the rate information from brokers when they request it. It's really kind of piling on the motor carriers when it comes to dealing with brokers and really, unfortunately, all too often right now, these illegitimate brokers that pop up will broker a load, and then when it comes time to deliver the load, it's already been double brokered off somewhere else, or there's actually no cargo, or when they deliver the cargo, there's no money going through to the motor carrier. So it's really a combination of a lot of different concerns between motor carriers and brokers that if you had these broker transparencies in place at the get-go, I think would help combat a lot of the issues that we're seeing continue to pop up throughout the industry. And this is really kind of going back a year, 18 months now, as continuing to escalate and really making it difficult for motor carriers to identify bad brokers and to be paid in full on the loads that they're delivering.
While we're waiting for this potential rulemaking to come out, assuming that one does come out, what's the process after that? I mean, what happens after that point?
Yeah, we did see in the latest regulatory agenda that this initial phase of rulemaking is going to be a notice of proposed rulemaking. And that was, again, another positive sign. Sometimes you see previous stages of rulemaking. So given that this is going to be a notice of proposed rulemaking, we're hopeful that it can move as soon as possible through the rulemaking process. That's why we want to see FMCSA get this thing published here. You'll have a comment period generally of 60 days on what FMCSA is proposing. And then from there, FMCSA will review the public comments and then I think in all likelihood issue a final rulemaking at some point. And that can kind of depend on a few different factors. I think the agency's got a lot of information at their fingertips when it comes to all these broker problems, considering everything that's gone on over the last few years. So, we want to see what's in the proposal when they come out with it. We think they are going to move in a direction to improve broker transparency, and then we'll provide some feedback, and we'll encourage all the drivers out there to do the same. And then hopeful if they can get this thing out here by the end of summer, early fall, could have a final rule sometime next year and really start cracking down on all these broker problems.
Let's move on to another topic here, Jay. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration is soliciting petitions for waivers from its previous decisions to preempt meal and rest breaks in California and Washington state, which, of course, brings up the question, what were those rules for meal and rest breaks in California and Washington state?
Yeah, so California, Washington, quite a few other states as well have employment rules in place for covered types of workers. A lot of cases going to be employee drivers where they say if you're taking a mandatory lunch break, a mandatory rest break, that you have to be paid for that time. And, kind of given the differences between some state, intrastate trucking rules and, of course, the federal interstate hours of service rules, it can create some confusing payment and different break rules for interstate truckers. And this had been a big issue for large corporate carriers, and ATA, along with some other groups, petitioned the agency in 2018 and 2020 to preempt the state rules in California and Washington. And FMCSA decided to grant the preemption based on the federal hours of service rules. There were some challenges from the Teamsters, from the states themselves, that for FMCSA's preemption, those challenges to this point had been denied. And FMCSA now is kind of reopening this question on if drivers should have access to these mandatory paid meal and rest break rules in California and Washington, and they're going to be considering waivers to their initial preemption. So it's kind of an interesting notice that we saw published on Monday here, and kind of reopens this question on meal and rest breaks, which can kind of really create a confusing patchwork when it comes to rest break rules, how drivers are paid. Really kind of opens up the question on how interstate drivers and intrastate drivers and interstate commerce and interstate commerce should be defined. But kind of the main points on this is that FMCSA is going to be considering waivers. They encourage anyone, any motor carrier or any states that want to apply for a waiver to submit those to the agency by November 13th.
Soliciting waiver petitions is something I've not heard of before from FMCSA, basically asking people to petition them about one of their own decisions. First, is that unusual? And second, does this indicate what direction the agency might go on this?
Yeah, this is quite unusual in my experience. And I think it kind of certainly, does indicate that the agency, if it's warranted, could clarify some of these meal and rest break questions. And I think perhaps it's an effort to get drivers, more compensation for the time that they spend when they have to take breaks. But it is very a complicated legal and labor issue. And certainly, FMCSA has said they want to try and make trucking a more rewarding job. They want to improve driver retention. We've supported those efforts. I'm not sure that this is the most direct way to go about that, but we've already, we've seen ATA. They've come out in full force and rejecting this move to kind of reopen the meal and rest break question. We kind of we think there's a lot of questions about that interstate and intrastate driver and employee, what employee drivers are entitled to, that certainly need to be looked at as part of this waiver process. So very unusual, going to be interesting to see how many waivers are submitted to the agency, and kind of what kind of labor questions this reopens in terms of employee drivers, especially with everything that's been going on in California and AB5 as well as another wrinkle to all this.
Are we aware of any other states that have meal and rest break provisions like this, or is this really just these two states?
No, I think there's 21 states in total that have some form of meal and rest break provisions, but only California and Washington have been preempted by the agency there. So again, a lot of federal rulemaking versus state rulemaking questions at hand as FMCSA considers waivers for this issue over the next couple months.
Okay, well, Jay, we've run out of time, but thank you very much for all the information.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
I've been talking with OOIDA's Jay Grimes. Landline Now will be back in a moment.
You trust PrePass for more bypasses? Now let PrePass help with tolls. PrePass toll service means lower cost, one invoice for all tolls, and fewer violations. Created by truckers for truckers. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Attention all truckers, Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I want to talk to you about those dreaded tax problems. I know you want to keep on trucking and not even think about them, but let's face it, they're not going away all on their own. You need professional help. I've been helping truckers put their tax problems in the rearview mirror for years. I can help you too. Call me now for a free consultation at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com. It's like I always say, keep your eyes on the road, I'll keep mine on the IRS. 888-557-4020.
Landline now, welcome back. A trucking company recently made a special delivery to Camp Toccoa in Georgia. Missy Payne is a driver recruiter for rail transport. She was instrumental in coordinating the effort to get the engines and propellers to Camp Toccoa for their Project C-47. She joins me now. Missy, can you tell me more about this unique load?
Well, where I live here in Toccoa, we have Camp Toccoa at Currahee. And that is actually, if you've ever heard of the Band of Brothers or anything about that, that is where the paratroopers trained back for World War II. And over the last many years, they have been reconstructing the barracks as well as a lot of the different grounds and structures there at the camp. And one of the final pieces they've been there's still a lot to go, but one of the pieces they were working on was a C-47 that they had obtained in pieces, and they have rebuilt that entire plane. The two things missing were the two engines and propellers. And for years they've been working on this, and a year and a half ago, Patrick Hall, who works there, he's also an elk with me at our Elks Lodge, was discussing that they had found somebody in Wisconsin that had the engines and propellers that were needed, but they had no way to get them here. Basler Turbo was going to donate those items, but it was still more of an expense to get them here. And at the lodge one night, at the Toccoa Elks Lodge, I heard those guys talking about it, and it just, here in Wisconsin and here in trucking and then here in Camp Toccoa, I just put it in my mind to ask my company, would they be able to assist in that? And of course, rail being as military-friendly and veteran-friendly as they are, they jumped at the chance. So they brought those to the camp and delivered them directly in front of the plane for no charge.
Oh, wow. And you kind of touched on it a little bit, but can you talk about your involvement, obviously not just what you do at your company, but your involvement also with the Elks Lodge that you mentioned?
I'm actually the House Committee Chairman at our lodge and have been for several years. Also, I'm the lecturing night at our lodge. Generally, I'm at the lodge 5 to 7 days a week, every week. And we do, not just our lodge, but all across the United States, all of the Elks Lodges are extremely military-friendly. Our children charities and our military and our veterans are two of our biggest projects. So we work all year long in all different capacities with different individual veterans programs, and everything from nursing homes to things like Camp Toccoa. Where it bleeds over is a lot of the guys who are veterans are members, and a lot of those veterans volunteer at Camp Toccoa as well. So they have dual purposes there as far as the work they are hands-on doing, whether they're working in the gift shop or doing tours of Camp Toccoa or actually building the plane and these barracks and reconstructing the grounds there. So they work hand in hand. And that's how we do veterans events, like Veterans Day dinners we've done at Camp Toccoa from the lodge. We donate money to the lodge that we raise, or to the camp every year, that helps these building projects monetarily. We can just write them a check every year besides just the work that we can individually do. Mm-hmm. So they just go hand in hand. That's our one of our biggest things at the Elks or any Elks Lodge across the United States is our veterans.
What did it mean for you personally to, be so invested in the Elks Lodge, but to have your company, be so gracious to help out with this project?
I'll be honest, it's actually still a little overwhelming, simply because not only myself, but so many people that I'm friends with and family donate so much of their time and energy to the lodge. And that's one of our just greatest blessings here. But to be able to tie that in with something else that I am so passionate about, which is rail transport, to be able to work for a company that has the same values you do and supports the things that you do is, like I said, it's still just kind of overwhelming to see your hometown that you were born and raised in and standing among friends and family that you work beside every day on the grounds of Camp Toccoa, which is such a historical and important place, and then have a rail transport truck with a veteran, a U.S. Army veteran, driving that truck right beside this plane. It's really overwhelming, and it's humbling.
And how significant was it? Did you say there was a U.S. Army veteran who did the trip, who drove?
Yes, and that's, again, rail is such a military-friendly and veteran-friendly company. It was priceless that they sent a U.S. Army vet that delivered the load, and just to be, again, standing there and you're seeing him talk with the other veterans that I work with every day, and the pride on both sides of the coin, and them going through and talking about the truck even they was in and the things that rail transport does for our veterans internally. We have a veterans program. It's an honors program. That's a question I ask every driver I hire if you're prior military, because rail has things in place to honor those veterans, and they're given special things at different times, as well as nice decals to the side of their tractor. Rail also has one of the only companies I ever hear of, because I hear it every day, that these guys that are still active, that have drills and things, they'll be at companies for a long time, but they have to quit their job to go serve their country, and then they have to come reapply and lose all their seniority. And with rail transport, you simply give them your dates of when your drills are, and you're able to go take care of what you need to for your country and come back and start back at your company with the seniority you already had. So again, it just day-to-day work lining up with what you have to do for a living to line up with the way you live makes rail transport a very valuable thing to me.
And from your perspective, why is it so important that we honor our veterans?
Oh, man, that's a loaded question. I believe that each and every one of us are different. I know we all have different values and we all have different beliefs. But I believe the reason that I get to choose to live the way I do, to work where I want to volunteer where I want to, is because of all these men and women who do serve, have served, and everything that they've done over the years, all the way back to the work there at the training at Camp Toccoa. Everything that was done allows me to live the life that I choose to live. And also the people who don't agree with me or live different lives, it gives them that same ability. Mm-hmm. And I think that every American owes them a huge debt of gratitude, and anything we can do to honor them in the work we do at Toccoa Elks Lodge and the work that they do to preserve that historical site and educate through Camp Toccoa are necessary and also very valuable.
Mm-hmm. And as far as the engines go, was it multiple engines or just one?
2 engines and 2 propellers valued at over $60,000.
Oh, wow.
that were donated through Basler Turbo out of Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And then just like I said, they literally had been a year and a half from the time that they first was contact in regards to those being found, and that they were willing to donate those to the camp. It was a year and a half before we came to this project with rail to be able to get them here.
What is the significance? What does it mean to have the engines and the propellers at Camp Toccoa?
A lot, because several different things. One thing that comes to my mind is just the work that I see that these men have put into rebuilding that engine. I remember being there several years ago for Veterans Day and seeing it on the ground in pieces, and to see it upright now with just those missing from the front is huge, because there's not just people in Toccoa, there's not just people in the United States, there's people across the world that travel to Camp Toccoa to view the grounds, to go through and look at this part of history, because it's not just people like me here in the U.S. that appreciate what these men did there, but because of what they did for World War II, there's people across the world that know what a contribution these paratroopers played and how that went and how they get to live their lives today because of what these men have done there. So to be able to visit there and see a piece of that is not just looking at the Grand Canyon or that's something that meant to these people's lives today across the world. So I think it's huge.
And the C-47 project, I'd read online that Camp Toccoa intends to repair and repaint the aircraft. Is that the plan?
Absolutely. The work is actually scheduled to begin on that portion in September. So everyone's really excited. Each thing, like I said, there's a lot of people that come into place to get all these things done, and they work around different schedules, but also money. They work off donations. So as funds become available, but also as labor becomes available, because most of these guys are either veterans that are older now, maybe, or people that are not as that are younger but still work. So these are all volunteers, and it's all done through donations. So some of these, just like that, getting the engines here took a year and a half from the first contact. Some of these things take some time, but it's the dedication of all the people working together to make it happen is what keeps it moving forward.
What do you think it's going to be like once it is all together and the project's complete and you're standing there and looking at it?
Again, overwhelming, because the visual of the first time I saw it on the ground years back was just amazing to see. It just, like I said, just being such a part of history and knowing what it takes you back to of what those men were doing and where they were at and what was going on around them. But then to see it put together and upright is a whole nother feeling. I can only imagine when I see those propellers and on the front of it, like it can take off. And I'll tell you, I literally just got to see one a month ago because we had a functioning C-47 that was here in our town that they were doing a live jump from. So it's amazing. It looks just like it. So to see the one they're rebuilding and the one that they brought in it's pretty cool to see it.
That was Missy Payne with Rail Transport talking about the special delivery to Camp Toccoa. For more information on Project C-47, you can visit Camp Toccoa at Currahee.org. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford. Stay tuned for more after this.
Firestone tires are for more of everything. More miles for every tire dollar, and more confidence in your fleet. At Firestone, we help fleets save with dependable value. Find your local Firestone dealer today at firestonetire.com/dealer.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off Truckstop Loadboard Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Loadboard Pro.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount. Landline Now. Welcome back. It's time for another of our 50 on 50. 50 significant events from OOIDA's history in celebration of the association's 50th anniversary.
Welcome back to another in our series celebrating OOIDA's 50th anniversary. Scott Thompson here in Studio A, joined by Rod Nofziger, the association's Chief Operating Officer. Good to see you, Rod.
Good to see you, sir.
We've got a big win to talk about today, and it came after a very big fight, a prolonged fight surrounding cross-border trucking. I want to talk through this and walk through this chronologically if we can, starting with, I suppose, the start of the battle, which makes the most sense, which begins in the early 2000s and kind of continues on over the years. But let's talk about the origins of how this fight even began.
Sure. It goes back to actually 1994.
All right, there you go.
All right, with the North American Free Trade Agreement. And there was provisions within that agreement. There was a big push by multinational corporations led by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, big push to open up the southern border, if you will, to trucking. Essentially pull off any sort of restrictions and allow trucks domiciled in Mexico, drivers domiciled from Mexico, to operate freely within the United States. NAFTA, so that was a big push within the NAFTA, the NAFTA negotiations. Ultimately, and that was under the Clinton administration, ultimately what came out of that was sections that would allow for cross-border trucking with Mexico, but there were pretty strict stipulations that were placed on that and restrictions, and it was supposed to be phased in over several years. So really from 1994, 1995 until about 2000, trucks and drivers from Mexico were really only allowed to operate within border states, southern border states, and only really within a commercial zone, which I think was 20, 25 miles along that southern border.
Okay.
So there was significant restrictions. In other words, those trucks and vehicles and drivers really were not supposed to be operating in the inner part of the United States.
But then, in the 2000s,
yes,
things really ramped up, and that's when this really got started in full force, right?
With the Department of Transportation under the George W. Bush administration, opening up that southern border for trucks and drivers from Mexico was one of their primary priorities when they got into office, and they pushed forward. And the battle was on.
Yeah, and we were talking a little bit before, but you were really on the front lines of this battle. This has consumed you essentially for several years there, and I want to make sure we talk about why the association opposed this, just to give people a better understanding of, A, what was happening, and B, I suppose, what would have happened if this had continued on at the pace it was going.
Yep.
This would have changed the industry in dramatic ways, not just in those border states, right, but throughout the country. And
yes.
This is why the association was, again, on the front lines fighting back against this. Talk a little bit about that.
Yep, absolutely. And I want to make sure that it's clear from the onset, this had nothing to do with OOIDA having anything against our trucking brothers and sisters from Mexico. What it was really about fairness and making sure that the same sort of regulatory burdens, regulatory costs that continued to be piled up on U.S. trucking companies and U.S. truck drivers, that there was equivalent to things in place for folks from Mexico. And at that time, there just simply wasn't. The same sort of, whether you're talking about highway safety or environmental, or eventually it became security as well, homeland security stuff, those regulations simply weren't in place, or nothing similar to what was in place in the United States was in place in Mexico. Some of it was on paper, but enforcement simply was not there. So it was truly a matter of fairness to make sure that everything was essentially being played on an even keel.
Right. So, yeah, essentially what you would have had, again, had this continued on, is you would have had carriers based in Mexico essentially competing with carriers based in the U.S. without as many restrictions on them, which would open up, the borders, and essentially we'd be talking about what, much cheaper freight? I mean, what would it look like?
Yeah, because without those regulatory restrictions or burdens, if you will, trucks and drivers from Mexico could operate significantly cheaper. They were also at that time being fueled up by state supported fuel programs down there. So even the fuel from Mexico was that trucks down there fueled up with was dramatically cheaper. So, and that's really where proponents were pushing for. You had a lot of these so-called maquiladoras. They're manufacturing plants just south of the border, auto industry manufacturing plants where they wanted their cake and eat it too, if you will. They wanted the cheaper labor, less restrictions down there, but then they also wanted that in place for transporting those goods across the border. And again, multinational corporations were really, really the ones who were making the push. They wanted to dramatically pay dramatically less as far as the freight goes, as far as how much they're paying drivers as well, because there was a significant difference in compensation for U.S.-based drivers versus Mexico-domiciled drivers.
Yeah, and this is one of these things, and you kind of touched on it there, but the association was, again, on the front lines of this because it would have affected OOIDA members in a significant way. I mean, we'd be looking at a very different landscape right now. There are a lot of people working right now that probably would not be working.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, if this had gone into effect in full force.
Yeah, so the battle raged, and when I say raged, I mean that did consume OOIDA and our efforts, and we were successful. I will say we were successful over and over and over again on Capitol Hill. We had the support of Democrats as well as most Republicans on these issues and continued to do the battle. There's lots of twists and turns that happened really between 2001 up till around 2009. Again, several times we were successful. Huge thank you to OOIDA members back in the day because they really stepped up, talked to their lawmakers, motivated their lawmakers to vote in an appropriate way that protected their interests. And again, we had significant success. We battled it out in the courts as well as in the overall regulatory arena. Ultimately, it then spilled over into the Obama administration. Mexico slapped on $2.4 billion in politically targeted tariffs. And even with that, ultimately, the Obama administration put in a pilot program, a 3-year pilot program that finished up in like 2014. Ultimately, you had less than 40 Mexican carriers that decided to even participate in the program. And in the meanwhile, the standards on Mexican carriers, Mexican drivers, the standards really were brought up not only for those entities in the United States, but were brought up in Mexico as well. So the playing field was being evened throughout that time. And it would have been a dramatically different world in the United States today if OOIDA was not at the forefront there. And I say that without any reservation. Without any reservation. It would be a different trucking world in the United States right now if OOIDA and our members were not at the forefront of that fight.
Couldn't say it any better myself. Rod, thanks for walking us through it. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
That was another of our 50 on 50. 50 significant events from OOIDA's history in celebration of the association's 50th anniversary. We'll bring you a new entry every week from now until the actual anniversary celebration.
And that's our show for today. We thank you for listening to Landline Now and hope you'll join us again tomorrow.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife.
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome,
and I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us!
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.